Welcome to It's a Long Road, the Rambo series podcast. I'm your host, Ryan, and with me today I have a very special guest, John from across the pond. No, that wasn't meant to rhyme, but that's what just happened there as I said it. John reached out to me via email, and he says, hey, do you want me to come on and talk about Rambo? He says that he might have some interesting insight about Rambo, John Rambo, his character, the psychology, or how maybe veterans of traumatic experiences or even non-veterans of traumatic experiences might act in some of these situations. He says he might have some interesting insight. He didn't tell me what the insight would be, but I suspect it would be very interesting. John, how are you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you. That was a good introduction. I'm not sure I live up to it, but yeah, I'm interested in the character, and hopefully I can say some things about the character from a psychology point of view. To be fair, I was introduced to the Rambo films when I was studying at university. A friend of mine, Bill, was a big fan. You might even say obsessed by the films. And then I started watching them, and I found them quite interesting character portrayals, and I got more and more hooked into the franchise, I guess. At the time, I was also studying film, so it was kind of interesting just thinking of it through that lens. But I've been listening to your podcast so far and found them quite insightful and entertaining and engaging. So I was quite keen to get involved and maybe say a few things, add some layers of interest that's already been unearthed so far.
Well, that's very kind of you. Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate you reaching out to me via email. If anyone else wants to reach out to me via email, we haven't gotten any emails really recently, which is fine. I mean, I'm not going to cry about it, but it's, I kind of missed the early chat at the beginning of the seasons, and it sort of stopped. The numbers have gone up. People are enjoying the show, but I guess nobody really has anything to say. But if you want to come and say hi, check out the show notes. I don't have this email memorized. I think it's Rambos Series Podcast at gmail.com. But check out the show notes for verification. You sent me an email. I said, hey, I'd like to come on the show. And I've had people, this is not an offense to you, John, but I've had people reach out to me before with my Rocky podcast throughout the years. And they're like, oh, I want to come on. And they just kind of come on. They just say like, oh, I want to come on and crack wise or whatever, or say this or say that. And it's often it's people that don't listen to the shows, and I don't really necessarily like that because they just want to plug themselves or like, I just want to come on your show. But I knew that you were a listener, which is good, but you're also the first, certainly for the Rambo podcast, you're the first person with some sort of educational background regarding the brain, how people think. You've studied this, and I've dabbled in psychology. I find it fascinating. I did some time in university with psychology. I did some bioscience and some philosophy and things like that, and I love how the brain thinks or how we think, or anyways, that's a whole other discussion. I could create a whole podcast on just how we think as humans. The whole psyche is just fascinating to me. So my next question to you at the time was, do you know how to talk on a microphone? Because I don't know who you are. You come on the microphone and you're like, you look good, you sound good, so I'm happy. Before we get into some of the discussion of Rambo's background, as you see it, how somebody like him would think or act, tell me your fandom of Rambo, of the film First Blood, and specifically, of course, now because we're in season 2 of this recording, your fandom of First Blood Part 2.
I guess it came from initially seeing Part 1. Actually, at the time, how old would I have been? I can remember specifically because I saw the film on my 14th birthday, and it was a 15, so I saw it a year too early, if you like. And
for our U.S. and Canadian listeners, you're just saying that the ratings here are like PG-13 or rated R, but you have like 15, I guess, is the age number there for...
Indeed.
Okay, yeah.
I actually seem to recall I was down the end of my road, I guess just hanging out with some friends. A few of them were a little bit older, and they'd seen this film. And they were talking about it in all, really. They were just kind of going through different scenes and just describing. They'd never seen anything quite like it, according to their description. So I got increasingly curious. I knew about the first film as well. So I thought, well, this would be a good thing to go and see. But then it was a 15, so it was my birthday, and I was living with my mother at the time, and I convinced her it might be a good idea we were going to see it. So she took me along. Happily, I don't know, but she took me along, and we watched it. We didn't say very much about the film at the end because I didn't really know how to relay to my mother what we'd just seen. So the thing we talked about on the way back in the car was the cinematography. We said, oh, it was amazing. I think we were talking about the shot of the helicopter coming into the foreground with the sun in the background and that kind of thing. Anyway, my mum could comment on those things, but I don't think she had much interest in the wider film. But that was my introduction to it, and that's partly how it came about. So, yeah, I was 14 years old.
Oh, nice. Okay. So now was part 2.
Was part 2.
Yeah. Okay. I don't want to ask necessarily how old you are, but I think you're probably younger than me. I could guess 36, 35.
Oh, wow. I'm 50.
What?
You're being very generous. Yeah.
Oh, there 50, you go. Yeah. Okay, well, good for you. Well, I was trying to gauge your age by the time, because you're saying when the movie came out. So you're a few years older than me. Okay, great. That's fantastic. So that's fantastic. Good for you. Did you see part 2 first then? Because a lot of people did see part 2 first.
Part of me that's thinking I must have seen part 1, maybe. Would it have been on television at that time? So there's some confusion about whether 2 took me back to 1 or 1 I had some snippet and understanding of.
Well, maybe you could offer some insight, because this is a question I kind of have is, I don't know in your studies, is there any real connection between violent events and media? Like, for example, if I had the tendency to be a violent person, let's say, violent movies already exist. Do movies really make me violent? Do they, quote-unquote, give me permission? Because my head's already not screwed on right if I want to do a mass shooting, for example. Like, I'm not thinking like my average person, my average family member, my average neighbor, the average person in the store. Like, the average person goes about their day not killing people. That's just, a shooting is a mass shooting or school shooting or store shooting or whatever those shootings are that happen in the States, of course, recently. People that do those aren't your, quote-unquote, normal, functioning, mental health, green type people. So what I'm getting at is these movies already exist, and they exist on a scale where millions and millions of people or video games are playing and watching these things. If video games, I don't mean to lead the witness, sir, but if video games and movies led people to violent actions, why don't we have millions of these things? And do they really inspire kids or people to create violent things, or were they just going to do it anyways? I.e., Hitler was just Hitler, and he didn't play any video games. So I know I kind of led how I feel about it, but I'm curious, is there any real evidence on your end in the science world that these things can make someone who would never be violent be violent?
Well, you conclude, I suppose if I pick up at that point, somebody who would never be violent is difficult to answer that one necessarily. But if I just kind of go to your wider question, you get research from both sides, and we often hear, I guess there's also some interest in who funds this research, of course, but you'll often hear there is no link, and this gets reported with reasonable regularity across various media outlets, and whether they have an interest in saying that or not, I'm not kind of particularly overly questioning that, but reasonably regularly we hear there's not. But also there is plenty of studies that say there indeed is a connection. It feels to me reasonable to suggest there has to be some connection, but it doesn't feel that necessarily means people who watch it are going to turn to violence. But maybe certain ideas are born out of watching certain things, which maybe widens somebody's considerations in the negative of what they might do. Perhaps you might say it legitimizes in certain ways certain actions and behaviors, and I know that's been pushed against gaming for some time.
Right.
I'm going to be cautious about saying precisely the connection or not, but I will say it feels reasonable to suggest there's some connection. That doesn't mean to say it scales up in the way in which you were suggesting. It's going to turn people violent who aren't necessarily angling in that direction.
That's kind of what I led to with my layman brain, was just that if somebody already had the inclination in their DNA to be a quote-unquote, on a mass scale or even on a private scale, a violent person, and they saw the behavior of what they thought about in their brain, saw it on TV or in a movie or a video game, that idea that, hey, if they can create this kind of imagery, why can't I just do it as well type excuse. I don't know if there's any kind of term for this in psychology or neuroscience, but the idea that unbeknownst to maybe me, I already have the inclination to be a violent person, and so if I see it played out on stage in the yesteryears or on screen today or video games today, that in a weird way gives me that permission to act out my fantasies. I find that fascinating, but at the same time, I wonder still if that person is already who they are, and by seeing this, the same thing that makes you a violent person also doesn't make you think clearly, if that makes sense. You're not thinking rationally if all it takes is a video game to kind of move you into the direction of a violent mass act. I'm
less attuned to this sort of intrinsic DNA kind of argument you were putting forward there. I suppose more I'm interested in the malleability of the human brain, the ways in which I suppose our environment can shape us. When you talk about DNA, I guess really we're talking about a nature-nurture argument here.
Right.
I'm more attuned really to the malleability of the human brain. Okay. I tend not to pathologize so much and have this idea of sort of this is going to come out, there's a fixed way of being which is just, I suppose, set at the point of birth for some individual. I can therefore sort of imagine how environments, exposure, plays a role in how we sort of consider ourselves in the world and how we act within it, I think could be a little bit limited just to sort of have this consideration of somebody had this propensity and they were going to do this anyway. I'm more interested in terms of the way in which our environments might shape us.
I'm of the same mind of nature, nurture. Absolutely. You can't, obviously the Ryan that is the DNA Ryan that exists right now, you put me in a wholly completely different environment in my formative years. The same DNA Ryan now wouldn't be who I am today. Maybe to a large extent, I'm not sure. I have children. I'm not sure if you have children, but I have kids. And of course, if I was just to like physically abuse my children daily, I can't imagine they'd be who they are today if I did it for years. Like, of course, there has to be some sort of connection between one's environment, their culture, religion, education, nurturing, love, not love, whatever, all the flip side of everything I just said. Like, yeah, it's going to form. I'm not a professional in any of this way, but I've always viewed that we don't come out necessarily all the same lump of clay. There's something in our DNA that is with us the moment we kind of plop into this world. I don't mean to be crass, but just when we exist into this world, there's something that's already in me that nurturing will, the malleability effect that you're talking about. Yes, but there's things in me that no matter how much you massage it, you'll never get out of me. No matter how much you massage me, like i.e., I try to play guitar. Okay, when I was a kid, I'm a huge rock and roll guy. I love the hair rock and the metal rock when I grew up. And I wanted, of course, to be like my rock gods. You know, these guys are playing guitar. I want to be a guitarist. I picked up guitar, took lessons, and now you could say, well, Ryan, anything you put your mind to, you can do. Like, I don't know if I necessarily believe that. I tried so hard. My DNA in me just didn't allow me to play like Slash and Angus Young. Like, no matter how much I tried, I didn't have it in me. And I recognized, I think I'm just a lover of music. I love the music, and I'm just a lover of music, but I can't create it. Even if I could play it technically, I don't even know if I had it in me to create a song. So even if I knew how to play it mechanically, did I have the romantic side of music? Was I able to create the sounds? Because a lot of people, you sit on YouTube all the time, people like covering Metallica or AC/DC. That's great. I admire when I see people cover, and some people are like, it's not very hard how to play like Eddie Van Halen. And I'm always like, no. That's the difference. There's the point is the DNA is, yes, you can play like Eddie, like you can play the same notes he played, but can you create his songs? He created the sounds. On to the discussion now of John Rambo and his psyche. So when you emailed me, you felt like, obviously at the time when you emailed me, that you might have something to say regarding John Rambo and the way he thinks or operates in these environments and his wartime experience. What is it about reaching out to me that you wanted to share regarding Rambo?
Well, perhaps some of that will come out as we're watching the film, and maybe when we're thinking about particular moments or expressions or ways of being.
Absolutely. We
could think about why he's operating in that particular fashion. But I guess something you've talked about somewhat already, actually, in part one, I think, mostly, and probably largely so at the end of the film, when he has a breakdown of sorts, when he's with Troutman, he's surrounded. There's much discussion around PTSD here. This is something he's accrued during his time in Vietnam, I guess, is what we're exploring. I'm thinking about the way in which he's, in certain environments, I guess, will be adrenalized, kicking in that fight or flight response and operating in a certain way which is quite defensive, and in simple terms here, I guess, staying alive. But I guess the opposite of that is what we see at the end of part one, when you see his fragility, his vulnerability, where he's no longer defending against certain ways of being, if you like. He's not in that defensive mode, and so he's tolerating the vulnerability and he's expressing that, and that's quite a powerful moment in that film. And there's some kind of moments also, and I think in part two we see some of that fragility too, or that vulnerability. And I think in the scene it will come up when he meets the lady who's his guide, when he's dropped into or behind enemy lines. I forget her name in the film.
Cole.
Cole. Without perhaps saying what happens, because I think that will come up in the time we're running through the various rushes we'll be looking at. You see sort of a moment of vulnerability there too. And so I'm interested in those two sides of the character. That defended, that adrenalized person, but also that vulnerable place, and how that vulnerability is defended against.
The episode before this one, John, we actually discussed the Coe and Rambo moment on the boat when Coe says, Rambo, you're not expendable, and Rambo was sharing his feelings. So do you want to speak to that moment in the film? And maybe how that was the most vulnerable or softest we've ever seen Rambo, why that might have been?
There is this moment, as you've just highlighted, Ryan, on the boat when there's this discussion of Rambo being expendable. self-effacing way he highlights. I think he says something about when you go to a party or you're invited to a party, you don't show, but nobody really cares. And that's his definition of that particular phrase.
What do you think of that? What do you think of that analogy that he used? I thought it was a pretty smart analogy.
It's got a certain poignancy, hasn't it? It cuts through when he says that, and you feel that. And I guess in that moment when he's expressing his vulnerability by saying that, you kind of warm to the character, invites you in. It's those times where he's not pushing away. And so there's something very alluring about that, I guess. And when people are able to get behind their defenses and show who they are, it is something that really does, like I say, pull others in. And I guess when you're watching the film, that's why you have a certain connection in that moment. Coming up in what we'll be watching today is also the tragic scene where this lady Co, who I suppose he's building relationship with in different ways, shortly after her declaration, or his declaration, that they're going to go to America together, which she requests, and I guess they're falling in love for these few moments in time. She's then taken from him. She's shot within seconds later after that scene. And so you see this tremendous vulnerability in the character, and then you see his aggression straight after when he's shooting those, you might say understandably so, who've just shot the person he's likely to spend the rest of his life with. But those are the kind of the moments that capture my interest with this character. Okay,
all right. Well, let's roll right into it. So where we left off now is Rambo and Co are now being dropped off, like you said, kind of behind enemy lines, or closer to where Rambo was officially supposed to take pictures. Of course, he doesn't have a camera anymore, so I guess maybe he'll just draw something. I don't know. But he's getting dropped off now where the prison of wars may or may not be. So they reached the camp, the semi-looking like shanty town of a village where, of course, the music score has changed. That they're in a dangerous area, or this might be a dangerous part coming up for them. But they've reached the area where the prisoner of wars may or may not be.
Point of interest, I don't know if it came up in one of your other discussions, but just looking at the scenery, the backdrop, as well as you're talking about the music score there, I understand this was filmed in Mexico. Interestingly, of course, Rambo Part 5 is in Mexico, but I think that was filmed in the Canary Islands, so I gather.
Oh, Part 5?
Yeah. Oh. So just a curiosity that the Mexico one wasn't filmed in Mexico, but this one was, although it's supposed to be Vietnam, as it were.
Yes, that's right. I didn't know it was filmed in Mexico either until I started doing this season. I just never researched that much, but I guess that kind of makes sense. But it looks great. Like, I don't know what jungles look like really anywhere outside of where I live, and I don't live in a jungle, but I guess the Mexican jungle, it really passes for what I would think a Vietnam jungle looks like. It looks very Vietnamish. I know it sounds terrible, but all the Vietnam films I've seen, this looks just as well as any other place.
Yeah, from my limited knowledge of those landscapes, I wouldn't have necessarily known it was replaced and filmed in a different country. But there are a few moments, and maybe we'll see them, where actually it does look like they're on a film set as well. And so something changes. But I can't quite remember where those are, but they'll perhaps pop up as we're going through. But otherwise, it's a pretty convincing set, yeah.
There's something really neat and aesthetic about the 80s and 90s of before CGI kind of or backdrops took over, where the aesthetics of just the real land, I just really like how the real foliage just looks better than fake foliage. You know, it just feels better. And I think the actors kind of take that environment in too, the sense of danger around the real insects and what have you that are around the actors during these films that you don't get on a soundstage.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, actually. Just thinking about using real landscapes to land as opposed to CGI. I guess that says something about the character as well, doesn't it, of Rambo? Because when he's in the operational room before he's flown in behind enemy line, you see all this high-tech equipment, and I think he says the mind is the best weapon. And there's something very earthy about that. There's something very human. He's close to the land. He's not kind of being taken away by all this high-tech stuff. And I guess not having a CGI background, it being very grounded in that way, says something about the character as well.
See? Camp empty. We'll move closer.
So I always found it interesting that she did believe the camp was empty. Like, she's been around this area. Whoever was hiding these prisoners did a fairly good job that she is a local and a spy. She hasn't seen any prisoners yet herself.
Yeah, it's a fair point. They do comment slightly later in the film that, or the POW that he temporarily releases before they're recaptured, he does mention they're moved around a lot. And I think he says, we've only just come back to this camp in perhaps recent days or weeks. There's a good chance she could have seen that camp empty for quite some time.
And we have a scene here where they've gotten closer to the camp. There's definitely armed soldiers here. And I love how they have a prostitute has come to the camp, and she's on a little moped or whatever, and she knows where to go. So I love wherever she has come from, it's moped friendly.
Okay.
Like the trail, or, from her, like, I don't know, wherever she lives or wherever she works out of. And she's all dolled up, and you think she's got to be nervous. Like, oh, yeah, I'm just going to go to this camp with a bunch of men, and I'm by myself. Oh, this is such a, like she's delivering pizza the way she's acting. She seems to be very casual with the shoulders.
Terrifying, I imagine. Terrifying, yeah.
You're a whore from village. What is it?
A bow, no sound.
I love how Rambo's putting together his bow and arrow right there. The guard is only like 20 feet away.
Is this the first time we see his bow and arrow?
Yes, other than him getting it ready to go in the airplane. Yeah, we haven't seen him use it yet. That's right.
This, throughout the film, becomes kind of his weapon of choice, really. You may have discussed this with David Morrell. He wrote the novelization, I think, for Part 2 and Part 3. I think he dedicates a chapter to archery.
I have read both Parts 2 and 3 when I was a teenager, but I haven't reread them as an adult. I read Part 1 as an adult, of course, before I interviewed David, because I wanted to have all that fresh in my head. It is mentioned in Part 1, or First Blood, the novel, so before all the films, that John Rambo was a bowsman. That was something that he did do. So it's actually mentioned. I think he kills and or does something with a bow in the First Blood. And I found that a nice little nod to the future character, that it wasn't a Stallone creation, because Stallone does like to... obviously the Rambo character, like Stallone has, what's the word I'm looking for? Made the character immortal on screen. That's what he's done. The genesis of the bow was actually in the book as well.
Somewhere in the book where he talks about the spiritual side of kind of archery, as it were. And I'm just also thinking of this Buddhist connection as well, and what's going on in the film as well. And so this sort of Zen archery and this kind of thing.
No bow, no sound, he says. Imagine if he said, no no bow. Stupid. My stupid humor. I apologize.
You're not going in there. But I thought you're supposed only to take pictures. What about orders?
No more orders, Cole.
I love that. No more orders, Cole.
You've got the speech up on... you've got subtitles up. Actually, a lot of this, I haven't heard this the first time round. And it's a bit like in the Blood 1, there's these little incidental kind of lines which are happening when he was going down into the prison cells, when they're talking to the chap who's painting the rooms down there. I forget his name now. But
Leroy.
That's right. But it's quite interesting seeing the words this time and picking up on things that are new to me.
Let me plug closed captions. It's called closed captioning on many of your devices. It's the CC or subtitles. I don't watch any movies that they don't have closed captioning. So I rarely go to the theater because I rely on closed captioning that much because of what you just said. There's so much dialogue that people don't catch because we are visual creatures and audio creatures, obviously. But there's times where we're watching the visual, we're not really paying attention to what they're saying because we might think it's I don't know what our brains do. It just decides I'm not going to pay attention to the audio or it doesn't come through very clear. But no, I absolutely love closed captioning because you catch little moments like that, little pieces of dialogue that, brain doesn't register, but I think your brain registers dialogue obviously better when you're reading it. I don't know why that is, but when you read the words. Quick side note, the reason why I started doing it with closed captioning is when my kids were young, I couldn't hear the dialogue on the TV. Like, the kids are playing in the living room, so I wanted to tell my kids, hey, shut up, I'm watching TV, you little, I turned on the closed captioning so I could hear or read the dialogue, throughout.
Okay.
So, ever since then, I've been hooked. So anyways, that's my little story, why I got hooked on closed captioning.
Well, I'm certainly getting into it now.
Well, I find a lot of people, once they get into closed captioning, they're like me. They're not hard of hearing. They just like not missing any of the dialogue.
It's not like we're indulged in dialogue in these films.
No.
We've got to grab it when we can.
So what I love here is we're seeing Rambo using his knife. His knife, the serrated edge of his knife is breaking open the barbed wire. He's put together his bow. It's nighttime now. No more orders, no pictures. Rambo's just going into this camp. Not guns a-blazing necessarily, but just metaphorically speaking.
Yeah, and I suppose they're using the knife here as well, because if you look at the reflection in the moonlight, that's the thing that stands out. It's like Michael Jackson's glitter socks. That's Rambo's kind of thing that you know where he is.
Yeah, that's hilarious. Good job. MJ, rest in peace. I always love how in these movies that there's always so many guards. They do have some POW guys here. All these POWs are not armed or nothing. They're all like malnourished and have no strength, but they have so much armed guards around these prisoners. Like each one of them's worth $1 million, but it's just for the effect of movies. I understand that.
It also allows Rambo to achieve his body count, I guess.
So Rambo's now deep into the camp, and he's running around, and he's got his bow in his right hand. He's using the shadows of the trees and shrubs, and again showcasing just how good of a soldier he is, that he's able to get this deep into the camp and not be spotted. He had a couple near misses, but he's able to go very deep into the camp.
We had that conversation about whether on a film set, whether in the jungle. These are the parts, I suppose, are more in a film set now.
I agree. Yeah. That's right. I totally agree with Rambo jumping around those bushes and the makeshift village and what have you. Yeah, this would be soundstage stuff, absolutely. So now Rambo is looking underneath the floorboards of the whore from the village and one of the army men having a couple drinks, and he looked underneath. I wonder how long he stayed underneath and watched. No, anyways, he took off pretty quickly.
Can't attribute that kind of behavior to Rambo.
No, he's not a peeping Tom. So yeah, soldiers are walking around, talking, chattering on their ships. What you expect from any kind of camp where there's guards around, but it's a very busy little camp. And yeah, I think that shot there, John, is soundstage here. What do you think? I don't know. It's tough to say. There's a lot of foliage there. I don't know.
So are you debating whether we're in a studio now?
I don't know. It's just the way it's lit.
Yeah, I don't know now.
Yeah. A lot of Rambo just running around, giving the audience a sense of danger. He's in the thick of it, right? He's in the hornet's nest. So he's gone deep. He's not taking pictures, but he's taking Rambo pictures in his mind, trying to figure out where because he knows he's not an idiot. There's soldiers. Why are all these guards here? Why do we have all these guards? What are they guarding? If there's nothing here, why is this place established? It's so established that, yes, we have the prostitutes from the village come to visit this place. There's guards with guns. So something's got to be here. So he's trying to find out what it is, and now he's just seen a makeshift jail-like cage made out of bamboo. So he's going to go towards that now. He's like, bingo.
I know he's going in under darkness, so he's not seen, but I guess it also sets a kind of a tone for this sort of the dark energy, this camp, what's going on in this place.
Yeah. So you hear some groaning of men. I always find it crazy when we'll see these actors, just how thin they are. It's like, hey, we need some thin actors for this film.
Yeah. I don't know if they're method actors and put the effort in to not eat for a while, or whether they just found people who are ready for the role.
So Rambo's looking into the cage. He sees rats crawling around, spiders on them, and people shivering because they're cold and malnourished and sick with the flu. Who knows what, right? They're probably lying in their own feces.
It's a pretty desperate sign.
Yeah. So Rambo knows now that they're there. So now he leaves them, though. He doesn't want to alert them. Goes back through the waterway. So you're thinking to yourself, what is he going to do now that he knows that they're there? And then he sees a guy outside the cage hanging on the cross, almost like in a crucifixion style on some bamboo on a bamboo cross. And of course Rambo has no choice but to release him. He tells him not to talk.
That was probably a very similar cross to what Rambo found himself on, you see in his flashbacks in part one. And so the thought of leaving somebody in that position, which he also knows very much about, would make perfect sense also.
Yeah, so he knows, okay, I can't leave this guy here. Can't free the other guys out of the prison just yet. I think he was probably trying to figure out what he could do, probably to eliminate the army at this point, to get those guys out. But in the meantime, he saw this guy out in the open on the cross. He's like, nope, you're coming down. So he takes him off the cross, tells him not to talk, of course. I always just find it interesting that nobody was guarding that guy on the cross, but that's okay.
Yeah, because you think there's enough guards to keep eyes on.
They got the guards everywhere but where the prisoners are. And this guy hears something in the bushes, turns on the spotlight, looks around.
There are others. I'll be back.
So the prisoner tells him there are others, and Rambo's like, I'll be back for them, don't worry. Right now we gotta get you out of here. So he starts leading this poor POW out. Alright, victim number one. Remember the beginning of the film where Rambo's putting together his kit, and he puts in those two little knives that go, facing each other.
Ah, yes.
And
yes.
I said at that recording, I say, I bet you we're going to see this knife be used, because of course they had to show it. So he took it from his bootstrap, the little mini knife, and threw it right at the guy's, I guess, heart, and it kills him instantly, which I love the accuracy that Rambo's able to throw that knife. It's just funny, because in real life, like, to be able to throw a knife with such force and velocity and accuracy to knock out a guard silently. And in real life, if that knife was thrown at you, it probably, it would pierce you, like, ow! Hey! Whoa! That kind of hurt. Dude! You'd be yelling out in pain at the very least. But I love how he just falls silently. There's no instant death from that little blade. It is kind of funny how people die so quickly with knife wounds. Because, like in those crime stories stuff you hear all the time, man stabbed 37 times, still walks to the hospital, but this guy goes down with one little piercing.
He's certainly a master of his craft.
Yes, well, yeah, he's Rambo. He doesn't miss, man. Now we're seeing a bit of Ko. She's hiding too. The heat is on, as they say. Look how jacked Sly is here, eh? His physique in this film is amazing.
Of course, you've got Rambo, you've done the Rocky films, you've got Arnold Schwarzenegger, and we're really in the period now of sort of muscularity in cinema, aren't we? And so it's not by accident he's not wearing a top. This is kind of how you sell the films now.
He starts this film kind of wearing a shirt and this, but as the movie progresses, he gets more and more nude. By the end of the film, he's just naked. It's really weird, but...
There's another thing I say, this is maybe going a little bit too cerebral, I don't know, but we're also around the time of postmodernism, otherwise known as a paradigm of plasticity. And what we see here is the plasticity of people's bodies. They're formed or overbuilt, so they no longer look real. They're kind of plastic, these characters. And it kind of fits the time or the epoch we find ourselves in.
For us as teenagers, like you, myself, when these movies came out, the Arnold films, when these came out in the 80s and late 80s, these were our Marvel hero guys. So these guys weren't mutants in the sense that they had superpowers where it doesn't matter what your physique is. If you're Captain America or even Spider-Man, has these incredible strength, but he's just a skinny kid. But for us, these were our Marvel heroes. These were our larger-than-life characters. That we recognized that these were more than human. They were human on screen, but they were more than human. These were our superheroes, absolutely. So I think when you look at it that way, it might make sense for maybe the kids of today who would look back and, oh, that's silly, huh? Yeah, but you're looking at a guy with laser eyes and what have you. For us, these guys were superhuman, but they were still human. But yeah, they were beyond what you and I would ever be.
I heard the phrase before we had films, you had Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and here in this kind of type of film, you got the Invasion of the Bodybuilders.
Very true, I love it. So Rambo just took out a guy with the spotlight. You can only assume that he wasted that arrow on that one guy because that spotlight might have been nearing where their exit was, so he took him out. So now they're back at the house where the woman from the village is with the guy. And I love how she's like, hey, come back inside here. I think we're to assume he's nude. She tells him to come back inside the hut and make love to her again. Now, I love Ko as a character and stuff. It's the 80s, of course. So she gets saved by Rambo. I kind of wish we saw Ko do more than just being saved by Rambo. But so Ko's in there, and she's about to get shot by this Vietnamese officer. I can only imagine he hesitated killing her because she was so pretty. And that gave Rambo enough time to shoot that guy in the head with an arrow. Classic. I love that violence. The arrow in the head. We know he is a skilled bowsman. He can shoot you wherever he wants, but I love how it's like, no, I'm going to get this guy in the head. I think that would be a fun hit.
He definitely was aiming.
And it pierces the guy to the tree. So the velocity of the arrow is so strong that it goes through the guy's cranium, pins his head to the tree, and they do a little close-up. Classic 80s violence. Almost comical now, but it's just, back then it was quite brutal. Oh man, the arrow went through his head. Ooh.
Yeah.
So now it's daylight. Guards are doing their rounds, and they're seeing dead bodies, and they've raised the alarm. So we're led to assume that Rambo did all those stealth killings. I think he killed 3 or 4 guys without alerting anybody in the process. So now it's daytime. They're seeing the kills. Now we're cutting back to base camp here. Troutman's getting ready for the extraction team. So Murdoch said, "Yeah, fine, Troutman, you can go. Yeah, we gave Rambo 36 hours. So if you want to, you can go pick up the guy. Sure."
This chap on the left, you can see on the screen now. Okay, I think he was a policeman in the American cop series Cagney and Lacey.
Was he in that? I'm not familiar with Martin Cole's
I understand
career,
he was.
other than, of course, he was on Karate Kid.
Okay.
Cagney and Lacey, you said?
Cagney and Lacey.
Yeah, you're right.
Cagney and
Wow.
Lacey.
You know
Okay.
what? I never knew Martin Cove played in
Cagney and Lacey, interesting there, you got two female leads at a time where there wouldn't be many female leads, I suppose, in American cop shows. And then if you contrast this film, pretty much as you've highlighted, the women we've seen here are prostitutes or Bow, who sadly meets her demise in this film. And there's much written around there just simply isn't a place for women in film. Men just take over, and if they're there, they're extras or they're gotten rid of in some way. Other films like Thelma and Louise kind of highlighting the ending of that film. There's no place. Effectively, they drive off the cliff because they can't exist. They can't have these strong women.
Yeah, that's true. Cagney and Lacey was kind of revolutionary to have two female leads for a TV show. But you're right, in this film here, especially an action film, us guys, we don't want to see women kicking butt. It's the men that kick butt. They save the day type thing, and it is unfortunate. But to Sly's own credit, though, the fact that he even had a female cohort with him in the jungle, and at the same time having Co there, as we'll see soon, it opens Rambo up. A male counterpart wouldn't have been able to do.
You have plans?
Minus 1 hour to extraction.
I hope for his sake we're not just wasting fuel.
Let's get moving.
What a stupid thing to say. I hope for his sake he's not just wasting fuel. Well, what he's saying is if he's dead, then he's not there, right? So the fuel's wasted because no one's there. But either way, it's not a waste of fuel. You need to verify his existence or not. Either way, the helicopters, they need to do their part of the job. Their part of the job is we will be there at the extraction point to come get you. The only way to verify that is to go there. So it's never a waste of fuel. You have to visually verify his existence or non-existence. Either way, they have to go back and say, we went there, because they have to answer to people, right? They have to answer to their superiors. Yeah, the mission failed. We went there. He wasn't there. What's plan B? So it's not a waste of fuel either way, whether he exists or not. It doesn't make sense.
It hardly seems a waste of fuel, which is going to cost, I don't know how much fuel cost back then, but right. Earlier in the film, they're talking about, I think, multi-million-dollar computers that are just there for Rambo to kind of watch his kind of mission, and yet he's talking about wasting fuel.
Right. I understand it's a plot device. They're just showing how much they don't care about Rambo. But, again...
Indeed.
So now the Vietnamese soldiers, there's so many, I don't get why there's so many of these guys. Anyways, they're all coming out of the, literally the woodworks and hunting Rambo, the escaped POW, and of course Co. Of course the POW is ill, he's sick, he's weak, he can't keep up with them. They've stopped to rest for a little bit, now the POW is going to talk a little bit to Rambo.
Good thing you came when you did.
Why is that?
They move us around a lot, harvesting crops. Only been there a week.
When was the last time you were in that camp?
A year. Yeah. What year is it anyway?
1985.
Camp's supposed to be empty.
Yeah, it's supposed to be.
They move around, so they're smart. I wonder why they're even bothering keeping them alive. Like it's a lot of work. I wonder what they're. Is it just to see them suffer?
I'm not sure, but Murdoch comments on it later, so maybe I could just say this, that there's a rationale for keeping the POWs, and I'll just say Murdoch will comment on this later in the film. I can't quite remember, but it will come up shortly.
Yeah, I can't remember either. Okay, so here we go. So, they move the camps around for the harvests and what have you, and I love how he says, what year is it? And Rambo says 1985. We don't get years very often in any film. Like, I don't think it's ever mentioned again in the Rambo films at all. I know in films in general, they try not to say what year it is because it just ages any kind of film that much more. But you can do that in this film because it is about the Vietnam conflict to say what year it is. What year did the Vietnam War end? Was it 79 officially or something like that? Something like late 70s.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, but if you're right, we're talking about 6 years in that case. They've been in this.
I think that's what they're showing you, that he's been a prisoner of war for at least 4 to 6 years, which he shows the face like, oh my gosh, I have been here maybe even longer. Like to him, time is almost irrelevant, right? So now we see the helicopter coming in. Trailman's checking his watch to make sure they make the landing point okay. Rambo's now carrying the POW over his shoulders because they got to make time. So now he's just going to carry the guy. Makes sense. They're still traveling through the woods or the jungle while the Vietnamese are closing in on him. And the Vietnamese captain is... I like how they kind of show that he's not a totally idiot captain. Like, he's leading them pretty good here. So this captain will come into play later, of course. So he's a competent type leader. He's telling his soldiers, go this way, come this way, this is where they are. So right now, Rambo, the prisoner, and Co. are on the boat. So they've made it to the pirates' boat. They're on the boat now with the pirates, making some headway on the river with the pirates. And then we cut to Murdoch, back in command center, looking at the computer screen view. But of course, I don't think he's really looking because he cares. I think he's oddly nervous that they do find him, that they do find Rambo. You already get that sense, like, ugh, I really hope they don't find Rambo.
There's a look of uncomfortability about him. He's sweating. He doesn't look terribly good.
So the Vietnamese soldiers get to the riverbank. The captain calls in and says, hey, they've taken off. They're on this riverboat. Like I said, this guy's very competent, which I like. They show that this guy is not a slouch in his own right. He calls in the make and look of the boat they're on the river. Now, Rambo, Co, and the prisoner, I don't know if we ever get his name, but they're in the kind of cabin of the boat, and they're about to have a conversation here.
We were talking about him not having a shirt on earlier. He's got his shirt back on. We're talking about muscularity in cinema, and he's got his shirt back on here. I don't quite know how that's come about.
I think if we go back, his shirt was on inside the jungle. It's just it was always exposed his arms. He wasn't completely shirtless in that nighttime extraction.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. They see this other boat coming to the pirates, but now the pirates have turned their weapons onto Rambo and the crew. They have been double-crossed. They've been double-crossed. You can't trust a pirate, John.
What has happened?
Oh, that's often been the case.
We've been sold out, he says.
Bastard.
I love how the pirate captain backhands Rambo's face. You hear that slap, and then Rambo barely turns his head and looks back at him like, do it again, boy, do it again. Yeah, I love it. Look like you can't just bitch slap Rambo. He's not going to feel that. Come on.
Don't go, Nan. Don't go, Nan.
Oh, these is weapons. Oh.
Yeah, so the little mini weapons have come out again. I think those are the side weapons. My bad. The knife that he killed the other soldier was just a small knife. But these are the mini little knives that he's now pulled out the backside of his belt. Rambo's now starting to stab the pirate crew with these little mini knives. Co got one for Co.
But this scene's not wholly dissimilar to the pirate scene you see in Rambo Part 4, is it really?
Yeah, same idea. That close quarter combat, quick kills. Great little action sequence there. Rambo takes him out with the shotgun, uses the weapons that are around him, dispatches of the pirate crew, and now the Vietnamese patrol boat is coming towards Rambo and his gang, though. So they're not out of the woods yet. Excuse the pun.
Hey, jump!
I fight.
Jump! Go on!
So, number one, I just want to mention that because I love every time that musical cue kicks in. I use it for the beginning of my episodes. I love that musical theme, the juju sound, that dangerous sound, or that menacing sound that Jerry Goldsmith creates for the Rambo character. He's told Co and the POW to jump out of the riverboat because it's going to be fired upon, and it's just easy for Rambo to fight on his own. So they jump into the water to safety and freedom, and Rambo remains on the boat while the Vietnamese patrol boat just lays waste with just fires into that boat like crazy, trying to kill this American.
This is unbelievable because there must be about 1,000 rounds go into this boat, and not one touches him. I mean, I know he's lying down, but nevertheless, it's quite a fate, isn't it?
Well, if you're ever fired upon by an M60, my advice is just lie down flat. That's a good idea.
Okay, good advice.
I do love how those Vietnamese soldiers are wearing their little Navy outfits. I love their little Navy. They're wearing the white and blue. It's like little Navy outfits.
I missed that.
Yeah, because they're Navy, right? They're on the water here. As a Navy man myself, I just noticed they're wearing Navy uniforms. Can you imagine these guys just woke up? Today we're patrolling the area, just normal patrol day. And they're like, hey, this is our big day. Go man that 50 cal and just open fire. Like, this is the biggest day of their career right here. Well, it's about to end poorly. But it started off really good. It started off really fun. They had a lot of fun with this. Now, if you remember, dear listeners, that Rambo saw that there was an RPG in that little hut there that the pirate captain showed him earlier. I had a feeling it might be used later, and here we go. So he's grabbed it, and now he's going to lay waste to the Vietnamese army. Which I kind of feel bad about, because if you think about it, those two young sailors on that boat, now they're Vietnamese soldiers and sailors, mind you, but they're not doing anything wrong. They were told that, hey, I just find it funny. They're just two sailors doing their job. It's like they don't really have any say in what happens in their country, is what I'm saying. But they were told, hey, we got people stealing prisoners. Can you get them back? But now, oh well. So, classic little scene here where, of course, Rambo blows up the... I love the explosions there, watching those edits. Blows up the Vietnamese patrol boat. He's about to jump off the boat, but before he can, there is a Vietnamese soldier, or pirate, above Rambo, who now strangles Rambo around the neck, while the patrol boat slowly creeps its way to the pirate boat to collide and explode. And so we have this action sequence. Of course, everyone's seen this 100 times in this film, where Rambo's got to fend off this guy and escape the incoming explosions. Watch that play out.
The music still kicks in again here. That moment with the music, it really kind of captures, doesn't it? The elation.
Yeah, I love you made it, Rambo. She's so excited. You made it, and it's almost quaint to see those little explosions now compared to, like, again, the Marvel Universe explosions and craziness. It's just kind of quaint to see these two boats collide and go boom. It almost seems quaint compared to today's, but I like it. I love the effect of that. Now, I don't know if that's a stuntman or if that's Sly. I know Sly does some of his stunts in this film. But because it's so panned out so far, I don't think it's Sly jumping off that explosion with the boat. What do you think?
I never stopped to think. I'd have to have a really kind of good look. I mean, it seemed convincing. I mean, everything looked right in terms of the kind of stature, physique, but it could easily be somebody else. But I didn't really capture it. But if indeed that is all sequenced the way it is, and he is jumping, that explosion's happened, I imagine it would have to be a stuntman, because it seems a bit close to comfort.
Like, you're right about the physique. It's hard to say that it could be Sly, but it's just because it's so far back. You think that if it was Sly taking that risk, they would just have a closer shot too, or a different, like a multi-camera to say, look, it's Sly doing it. I know the stunt with the explosion on the cliffs, where he jumps off the cliffs with the water later in the film. I believe that is Sly, because he mentions that his feet got singed with the explosion when he jumps off that ledge.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, so they made it across. They're going back to the land. Rambo's armed himself now, of course, with the weapons from the pirate boat. He made sure that he grabbed some before he left the boat.
You take this. We go on from here.
Better I stay till end.
This is the end.
Rambo, you're not expendable.
See their relationship building through all these things.
We'll stop it there. Of course, the viewers of the show know where this is headed, but that's a good natural place to stop. So what's happened is Koa's gone her way. Rambo's gone his way with her POW, of course, to extract the evidence with him. Like, he doesn't have photos, but he has better than photos. We'll get to that discussion to the next episode. John, how did you feel? Was this the first podcast you've ever been on, or?
Do you know, it is the first podcast I've been on, yeah. It feels there's too much to try and get in, because I was actually a bit worried when we were watching this, because when you told me the minutes we'd be starting on, I thought there's not an awful lot there in terms of for us to comment on. A lot of it in the jungle, in the dark. But actually, watching it with you now, I realise there's quite a lot going on if you really start picking it apart.
Yeah. That's the beauty of these podcasts. Yeah, I find the same thing. There's always something to comment on. It's fun. It's like a watch party. It's a watch party, and we record it, and we send out to our audience. Before we close, though, Is there any final thoughts you want to say regarding the psychology of John Rambo, of why he is the way he is?
I guess I was just thinking when we were talking about those moments of vulnerability that we see in the film, they're heavily guarded generally because to sit with that is so raw. And you saw at the end of the first film, First Blood, just how overwhelming sitting with that vulnerability and the trauma and all what he's been through. And so I guess it doesn't take much. You don't have to press many of Rambo's buttons for him to incubate himself against that kind of rawness. And so his reactions when he's adrenalized keep him secure in that way. They keep him away from those spaces, those tender, those fragile spaces. He's very incubated a lot of the time as a consequence of the PTSD. It's interesting to see that because you could kind of just consider it from the lens of the equal opposites. It makes sense when you see his sort of extreme behavior, when you see his extreme vulnerability on the other side. Commenting earlier about we're having a nature-nurture debate. If I kind of just think about anger and I apply that to this model here, I don't think anyone's really born angry. When you start dissecting the rationale for somebody's anger, normally they've had some trauma, they've had some upset, they've been bullied, they've been whatever it is, they've been abused, something pretty terrible has happened. And if you like this, after a while, perhaps for some kind of pact, I'm never going to go there again. I'm never going to experience that kind of rawness again, that openness, that vulnerability, that sensitivity. And so these ways of being, if you like, do something to keep you incubated from that. But as you can see, it's not always the best way of being. Although, I guess for the Rambo franchise, that's all we want to see, I suppose.
Yeah, if we had a stable, well-adjusted John Rambo, we might not have the Rambo franchise. Yeah. So I guess
exactly.
We thank Rambo for his trauma, for making such fun films for us to watch. That's awesome insight. As you were talking, I was thinking, boy, people that are like educated and smart listen to my show. I just find that funny. I don't know why I find that funny, because I don't know why. It just made me laugh. I was thinking of all the different people that listen to my podcast that I guess some might be educated.
Well, again, I mentioned a name of a friend of mine at the beginning of the show who got me into this franchise, Bill, and he was the one who told me about your podcast.
Oh.
And so he sent me some links, and so I started listening to them. And
Bill's not the educated one, so he's not educated. That makes sense. Okay, yeah. Thanks, Bill. I appreciate it.
I won't pass comment on Bill too much, but nevertheless, he was the link.
Okay, see, there you go. That makes more sense. It takes a non-educated person to tell people about my show, and I'm just joking. Bill, I'm sure you're very smart. A very smart lad, as they say, and you're part of the woods. All right, well, it's been an absolute pleasure, John, having you on the show, hearing your insights. So just you're the first kind of like listener, so to speak, of the show that's kind of guest host, because everyone else's guest host has been someone I've already known and or is a podcaster themselves. So you're kind of the first unprofessional professional to be on the podcast. There you go.
I'm honored. Thank you.
Well, the honor is mine. Thank you for taking the time out of your day and joining me today. So again, John, thank you so much for coming on the show and being a part of Season 2 of It's a Long Row, but unfortunately, we've reached the end of the episode.
Well, as you well know, Ryan, nothing is over. Nothing. You just don't turn it off.